I've been waiting a long time for this. All talk, no shock.
And now, from the Emerald City of Seattle, it's the Mike Seibert Radio Podcast. Your home for pop culture, Transformers, independent artists, interviews, Transformers, and stuff and things.
Also sometimes Transformers.
And now, here he is, the cream that always rises to the top, Mike Seibert.
Hey, welcome back to Mike Seibert Radio. I am your host, and today we're coming of Mage. Too Mage, Too Furious, to talk about the recently completed Coming of Mage saga, which includes the novel Coming of Mage and its sequel, A War for the Mages. Please welcome to Mike Seibert Radio, the one, the only Pizza Tossin' Mike, Michael Motorcycle, Michael Andrews. Welcome to Mike Seibert Radio.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot for taking the time. And also joining us is a special guest. If we were doing WWE wrestling, it would be outside interference. Oh my God, King! He's got a folding chair. He's coming off of the top turnbuckle. My God, he's dead. I don't know. The cover artist, the graphic designer of the Coming of Mage saga, also the one and only Aaron Thweet from Autopod Decepticast is hanging out with us as well. How you doing, my friend?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Although on most days I feel more like that YouTube viral video of a bunch of people, like the entire audience, throwing the chairs into the ring, and I'm underneath a stack of about 400 folding chairs.
Throwing folding chairs on top. I love it. I love
my enthusiastic cover artist, ladies and gentlemen.
I was gonna say we've been talking for like an hour prior to this, and it's just like, where did all that energy go?
Yeah, spoiler alert, I'm quite the diva about my cover art, so he's been through hell for the last couple months.
So a couple things, just kind of like some kind of housekeeping, foundation building. This is a podcast we've been thinking about doing for the last several years, probably dating back to when we all met IRL back at TFCon in Chicago, I think in 2018. And now we're here, now that the second book, A War for the Mages, is out, and we thought it would be a really good time to kind of chat about the books, but more than that, kind of talk about the journey that Michael Andrews, author, has been on, and then we'll kind of wrap in Aaron's sensibilities with the new cover project, because again, you can't see it; it's an audio podcast, but the cover images for both books are just incredible. I really like, and I've been spending the last several weeks of podcasts, whether it's been on my own show or other folks' show, saying, like, trying to describe the vibe and aesthetic has been kind of like a challenge for me. So I thought, it'd be cool, since we're all here, we kind of talk about that, go in a little bit of a deeper dive. So Aaron's going to kind of pop in and out as the discussion goes, as well as talking about the cover art. But I guess every saga has a beginning. And every podcast is somebody's first podcast. Probably has no idea what the hell a TFCon is, has no idea what the hell a APDC is.
Definitely that one.
Who is Michael Andrews, author?
Oh boy, how much time do you have?
No, I mean,
let me lay down on the couch here. Let's take you back to second grade. No, I guess, yeah, I'm a author / Transformers fan. I think that's how we all met. But I've been writing since I was a little kid. I went to school for creative writing. Even when everyone told me that was a terrible choice of major, I stuck to it. And yeah, now I'm in a place where I can spend a lot of my free time writing, and the self-publishing world is out there so that I can get myself out there more often.
Awesome. And I do want to spend some time talking about the self-publishing world, because you've had some successes, but you've also had a fair share of struggle as well. And I know more than a couple folks that are kind of struggling with that self-publishing space. And I know you have some insight that you can, I mean, some cautionary tales and as well as some successes you had. So we'll kind of unpack that a little later. But I guess for starters, what I don't know if I want to start with the lightning bolt moment that kind of like inspired you to bring the story of Coming of Mage to life, or if we just kind of want to start with, hey, what is this Coming of Mage and why didn't we call the sequel to Mage Too Furious? But no, I mean, so kind of tell folks kind of about Quinn and his friends and kind of what kind of what the vibe and feel of Coming of Mage is, and then we'll kind of unpack more as we go.
Yeah, the first time I wrote the very first version of Coming of Mage was a short novel. I wrote that probably about 2010, and it was a self-published thing, but it was a lot shorter. The story was a lot different. I guess it was sort of inspired by, at the time I was living in the North Shore of Minnesota in Grand Marais and working at a ski resort. So it's a little bit autobiographical in nature, but the type of writing style I do, I just can't stick to any certain formula. So I started jotting down notes about like what my life was like there, but it quickly became like, I want this set in the 80s because I love the 80s and I love the Brat Pack and I love 80s movies about the summer and jobs and everything like that. And I also want magic in there because I like wizards and I like adventure and I like swords. And I started forming this weird world of the Coming of Mage, where it's very subtle. It's set in a very realistic world that we all know, but there's magic in it. And you kind of see that now in the movie Disney's Onward, that Pixar movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Where
it kind of takes a modern sensibility, but is kind of in the backdrop of a world where magic very much exists. It's funny.
Totally.
You mentioned that now. I saw that trailer for Onward. I'm like, isn't this just kind of Coming of Mage?
Yeah. Oh, it definitely is. And in fact, they were using the term Coming of Mage like in a lot of their like pull quotes and stuff for the movie.
Oh
like,
my God,
a Coming of Mage tale.
I forgot about that.
Screw off.
Awesome. But headline:
I'll be taking the engine later. Yeah. So, but it is sort of that world. At the time, that film wasn't out, and Harry Potter was very big. But the thing of Harry Potter and a lot of other modern magic books, young adult books, is like this secret world of magic that's hidden behind the scenes from regular humans. And I didn't want that world. I wanted the world of like, magic's always been there. Some people have it, some people don't. And in a very realistic sense, the people that don't have magic don't care a ton about it. And they get a little scared of it, threatened by it, defensive about it. And mostly, that I think that's how magic would be in a modern world like today. You would just have these people that were just like, well, I can't do it, so forget about it. Mm-hmm. I don't care. So yeah, that's kind of the world that it's set in. It's this alternate 1980s, mm-hmm. Where a young mage, a young wizard named Quinn, works at a off-season ski resort. He's in love with a different type of magic user, which is an alchemist. So there's 3 classes of magic user in my book, and that's alchemist, mage, and magus, and they each have their kind of different set of abilities. So he's sort of getting out of his zone a little bit, going after this alchemist. It is a coming of mage story.
Yeah, I was gonna say we'll probably get into the pun game a little later because
that's all these 2 books are, Mike.
Exactly. I was gonna say I didn't realize how much until I kind of started getting into it. I'm like, oh my God, all these joke memes we've been slinging across on Twitter, it's all in the book. That sensibility kind of cracks me up. But so who's the audience for the Coming of Mage saga? Is it a YA type of thing? Who is this for?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if this is true for other authors, but when I wrote this book, I didn't think of it like a young adult book. It was someone I was trying to write a book that was like a newly minted college kid kind of breaking out on his own. And that story just kind of gravitates towards me. I just like that story a lot. I like it in movies. I like it in the things that I'm ingesting. But I just wanted to do some play off of that. And along the way, when I got my first publishing deal for it, they said, "Hell, what a wonderful young adult book you've written." And I was like, okay, I guess I wrote a young adult book. So there we are. So yes, I guess that's a long-winded way to say it. I do consider it a young adult book. It's technically a new adult book because the age of the main character is like a college freshman. So I think YA is they kind of go by the age of the protagonist, right? So young adult would be if your character is like a middle schooler, high schooler.
Okay.
So this is technically new adult, I guess you'd call that.
Got it. And I've interviewed other creators before that, like they've done like a graphic novel and sent it in, and the publisher, marketed it as a YA book, and it's like, well, I guess it is because you crystallized it. It's kind of the age of the protagonist. So right. That's interesting because, like, I don't know, I feel that things like young adult or YA are kind of a misnomer for what the content of the thing is. Like, for example, I think something like all ages kind of gets thrown in that as well. It's like all ages doesn't necessarily mean, specifically for children. Like, all of our favorite Pixar movies are all ages entertainment in that it appeals to all ages. I think sometimes it's an unfair comparison. But then other times it also kind of gives you a sense of kind of what you're in for. Am I losing my mind here? Am I onto something?
No, that's absolutely true. And I don't think we really live in a world anymore where you have to sort of break it out by that sort of demographic. Everyone's just reading what they like. And we have so many people that grew up reading Harry Potter, for example, that they just want to stick with young adult books. I read a ton of young adult books, and luckily I write them so I can pretend it's for research. But really, I just prefer those stories. They're more interesting. They're more escapism. There's more freedom to do a lot more like creative, big ideas that you can't always get away with when you're writing like a serious lawyer novel or a serious, crime thriller. You have a little more freedom when you're writing young, quote unquote, young adult.
Yeah.
Michael, would you tell me, would you say, this is Aaron speaking. I feel like I'm in a
hello, Aaron.
Meeting now.
Hey,
this
oh
Aaron.
my God, it's Aaron off the top turnbuckle. Outside interference. Where's the referee?
I just want to add too. I'd like to break in that Mike did not tell us he was doing that wrestling stuff at all. This all just came off the cuff, and we're pretty blown away. Big wrestling fan here, apparently.
I guess what I would say, I feel like the genre of young adult or new adult or whatever you want to call it, basically books marketed to people, we'll say under 20, has at least, it feels like it's grown a lot in terms of like the kind of subject matter it'll top. Like I go to Hunger Games series or Maze Runner. I feel like all blockbuster movies nowadays, like mainstream blockbuster movies, are kind of hitting in that genre. I mean, you could even go to Marvel Comics for that matter, and the MCU. And I don't know if it's stigmatized from an author standpoint, but I feel like the world is aligned to that style of story or subject matter, and the elements of fantasy being completely acceptable.
Right. Well, and that's why you see a lot of, like you were saying, a lot of movies, a lot of YA books get turned into movies, and that's sort of what's driving Hollywood right now because they are that bigger idea. They lend themselves to that big booming medium that is going to the theater. So I think you absolutely nailed it. It makes a bigger story. It makes something. It makes a spectacle on paper that you can translate well to film.
And so, generally in these types of interview stories, I'm usually very chronologically laterally minded. Not going to do that this time. We're going to kind of bounce across in time a little bit. And I kind of want to take us to a time back in, say, like 2018. So it's like we're all doing podcasting, and we encounter this this cool fan of our podcast, this Michael Andrews dude, this pizza tossing Mike, this Michael motorcycle, and kind of like we got to know you as being a fan of our stuff. Yeah. And it was later, like a little bit later, where it's like, oh, here's a copy of my book. I'd love it if you would check it out. Would love to get your take on it. And I remember even at the time, it's like, yeah, that sounds great, and I would love to have you on the podcast and talk about it. But that time, I would say, is kind of like I don't know if it's fair to say a transitional time of the coming of Mage saga, but basically, like, you had your book out there. As we learned later, it had been out there for quite some time.
Yeah.
Maybe
it was out of print, actually. Yeah. By the time you got it.
Exactly. So what I guess I would like to talk about is kind of take us through maybe like some of the sequence of events and your motivations, one for getting a sequel out there, and then from there going back and revisiting the original Coming of Mage. And then we'll kind of tie it all together with Aaron, where we kind of talk about the cover dressing project and kind of how that goes. But let's kind of start from where you met us, kind of going forward, and how we get to A War for the Mages.
Right. Well, and that's interesting because I think you might probably took it more as like an influencer and me trying to get my name out there a little bit. But really what I was doing was, you guys give me so much free content all the time. And I was just excited to meet you both shows, that I just was like, I wish I had something to give them. At the time, I wasn't doing my own podcast. I didn't really have anything to share with you. And I guess that was a form that I thought I could say, here's something I made that you can also see. So, and from there, it had been out of print for quite a long time. It did sort of spark the first musings of like a sequel, just having someone else engage with that world and sort of offline, you guys were sending me texts when you finished the book and telling me you liked these parts. And that was just really exciting. That was really inspiring to get me going again. But to pedal back a little bit further before that, I published it myself as a ebook, short novel. And then about a year after that or so, I got a publishing deal, and they said, you have to take down your copy of it and lengthen it up, make it a longer form book, and then we're going to republish it under our branding, and it'll be in stores and all this stuff. So I obviously did that. I was like, that's great. I pulled everything on my own. And one of the good things, going to be honest, not a ton of great things came out of that. But one of the good things that came out of that was it allowed me to explore the story more, in just looking for what I lovingly call filler and trying to make the book longer. I was able to explore some of the bigger themes that were there in my head alone. But now I could actually kind of fill that in a little bit better. It actually doubled in length, over doubled in length when I published it when they published it as a novel. And now the new edition that I put out with Aaron's beautiful cover is even longer than that. So I didn't change the story too much if you've read one of the other editions, but I did want to go through and I did have an opportunity to make it a little longer and kind of explore even more themes that I didn't get to at the time. And it kind of ties back to what you were saying about who's it for? Is it a young adult book? When they told me, hey, we're going to market it as a young adult book, that went into my thought process when I was lengthening the story. But really now I have the freedom to go back and be like, some of those things that were sort of tropey of young adult books, I don't have to be so precious about those. It's a story for anyone. That was kind of the cool thing about this new experience. Yeah. And
so since you had already kind of mentioned it, I was going to save this for later in the conversation, but I don't want to necessarily lose the momentum. Kind of talk about some of your adventures and misadventures in the self-publishing world, because like there's some things that kind of went real wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things, and this was a huge red flag, was that the publishing company that reached out to me, they were essentially creating a middleman in the self-publishing process. They were sort of taking it and they made promises like, we'll market it for you. You'll be in every bookstore. We'll just be taking our cut. And I was like, cool. Yep. Seems pretty standard. But it wasn't. They didn't really fight to have my book in stores anywhere. They didn't really make that push. There seemed to be no effort for them to get that book in stores. So that vision I had of like walking into any Barnes and Noble and seeing my name in print and the spotlight shining down on Coming of Mage on the shelves just didn't happen. And they did a couple versions where they got my name wrong on the cover. They got my name wrong inside the book. I found out a long time later they skipped in the chapter numbering. They jumped ahead one chapter. So just little stuff like that where they I was kind of like beholden to their mistakes.
And that's got to be so frustrating. I mean, one of the things that, so I've got a couple friends that are authors as well and are shopping around novels and are looking to get published or self-publish. And I'm not familiar with all of the different type of models, but one of the ones I've heard about from a friend of mine is what amounts to basically like a pay for play type of thing. It's like, if you pay us, we will publish your novel, and kind of some of the things that you were saying, put it out into the stores. And what I've heard from other folks is that basically, like, if you get a deal like that, run the other direction.
Yeah, totally. And actually on the back cover of Coming of Mage, I have a blurb from one of my favorite authors, who's Matt Forbeck. He wrote Vegas Nights and a host of other amazing fantasy-esque novels. Check him out, please. Matt Forbeck, he's awesome. But when he read my book and he gave me a great blurb for it, and then he reached out to me afterwards and said, hey, I think there's some red flags with this book deal about to go down, and I think you should be really wary of it. And at the time, I was very young and naive, and I was like, this is just how I need to get my foot in the door. This is how it works. You don't know, kind of a thing. And yeah, he was right about everything. I mean, it was being taken advantage of in a lot of ways. But it did teach me a lot. It learned me a lot of lessons, and it kind of got me back into the self-publishing idea. And Mike, I think some of the models you're talking about, so there's the more traditional way of getting your book out there, which is you once you finish the novel, you start querying it to agents. You want to get an agent first, and then they can shop you around to publishers. And along with that, what you were saying is, an agent will never take a cut of anything up front. It will always come of sales afterwards. So that's something aspiring authors can look out for. But so that model is out there. But as I'm not going to, I don't know if this is sad to say, I'm never going to be a career author. I think it's always going to be something that's going to be a little in my free time sort of a thing. But that has freed me up in a lot of ways to like write the things that I want. And the self-publishing world, Amazon takes a lot of heat, but their system for authors is really great, actually.
Yeah, and I wanted to spend some time talking about that because that one ties into the publishing of the sequel, and then kind of making the Coming of Mage saga complete with the new edition. But it's one of the things I guess I kind of want to impart to folks that are listening is, I mean, obviously what you're listening to is an independent podcast, and we live in that era of independent content where it's podcasters, it's YouTubers, and for some reason, you guys can kind of riff on this as well. It's like, it seems like that same feeling or sentiment towards, say, like podcasters and YouTubers doesn't extend to authors and maybe even musicians as well. I don't know if I'm crossing too many streams here, but like, the idea of an independent hobbyist author seems absurd to some. Or right. Like a hobbyist independent musician seems weird. Like you wait, you want me to pay for your music? Music is free. What are you talking about?
Right. Right.
Whereas like, this podcast you're listening to is free, that kind of thing. But it's, I don't know. It's the sphere of independent art has some weird nuances that I'm not sure if I can completely unpack, but I thought I would kind of kick that over to the pair of independent artists that I kind of have with here. And all of this kind of springs for some of like my recent philosophy of like, people die of exposure, pay artists for their art. That kind of, I guess, to kind of explain my headspace a little bit. But yeah, maybe the three of us can kind of riff and talk for a hot minute about kind of that idea of the independent artist.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll throw it over to Aaron in a second, but my 2 cents on it. I think the era of like the starving artist is over. That's sort of like dying for your art or like writing it on a napkin on a street corner while you busk is kind of gone. I think it's definitely a more effective model to say, hey, this is our day job, but here's also this important stuff we want to get out there. So we can live and you won't be seeing this now, but behind me is a great Transformers collection bought and paid for by a real, day job writing career. But in my free time, yeah, now I have the luxury of putting out my own work and and it's still getting read. It's just maybe not keeping me solely afloat.
I guess I should have framed it as the hobbyist artist. Maybe that's more clearly codified.
Sure.
Aaron, what do you think? Because you dabble in various arts and commodity arts, with graphic design and podcasting and things like that. What do you feel of this current age of independent artists and hobbyist artists?
Yeah, I'm glad you recodified it because in a sense, all art is independent to some degree or another. And I guess, honestly, I don't know how Mike would feel about it as an author, but yeah, I would say probably what I dabble in more would be commercial art versus fine art. I think I kind of some of what Michael said resonated with me because at the end of the day, the amount of hustle you're willing to put into both tuning your craft, your skill, your message, whatever it is you want to say, plus understanding how to market yourself and to get into like have people receive your message, like your stuff, be aware of your stuff. It's easy, at least in the United States and other places of privilege, it's easy to put that out there as long as if you have something interesting to say and legitimate skills and talent that you've built up and a savviness of how to put it out there, then you should be able to get hits and should be able to make a living. I'm not the best. I say that, and now to go back to your hobbyist artist piece of the conversation. It's not what my primary focus is. I've put in a lot of time over my life. I'm 43 years old, doing with lots of different creative endeavors, and it's hard for me. Like, one thing that I think it takes to be successful as an artist, probably of any genre, is to focus on a specific style, a specific overall tonality to your work. Not that you can't switch it up over time, but spending a good deal of time in one specific area is what it also takes to probably build an audience and garner success. And I'm not good at that. It's like, I definitely have different influences that I like that might range from comic book artists to graphic designers of the mid-century, European and American sensibilities or whatever. And I find myself dabbling around all the time in those influences in my own work and trying to do different things and incorporate it into my work. So yeah, focus of vision, I guess, is the other piece that is probably key. Now, but to bring it back, there's no reason I don't do art for a living, commercial or fine or otherwise. I'm in business, I'm in marketing, but there's no reason a person can't continue, if you have a creative bone in your body, to have that as a side thing, whether it's for money or for passion, and continue to build up those 10,000 hours and be as good as you can in whatever creative field you want to pursue on the side.
Right. Yeah. And kind of to add to what I was saying, I guess there is room for, there's breakthrough people all the time. That Halsey, for example, huge music career, kind of got her start, just being like a YouTube artist. And I think that's great, but that's not going to happen for most people. The reality is, you want to just be able to, sometimes you just want to get your stuff out there. And I, for one, just decided I don't want to sit on this heap of content that I've created over the last couple decades. I want some people to read it, even if it's not everyone, even if I'm not on the same shelf as Stephen King. I want to be out there in the world. And there's something sort of freeing about that. I'm not going to be, maybe this isn't going to be my sole form of income. Like it allows me to do it at my own pace. It allows me to be a little more courageous in what I write. Yeah. And I don't have to, necessarily stick to any formulas of the genre that I'm writing in. I can really play jazz, experiment, and see what comes out of it.
Yeah, to build on that further, while also connecting to something Mike said earlier about, pay artists and all that. I think, yes, artists should be paid and compensated, but it's up to the artist to stand firm on what their market rate is, or what they believe their market rate is. And they might find that their market rate isn't worth what they think it is some of the time, but they have to try. It's on them to try. They don't have to be on Fiverr. They don't have to participate in that. That said, if they want to, fine, go ahead. Like those are avenues to make money. But my point is that it's on the artist to decide what they're worth and try and get what they're worth. But they should also be willing to work for free if it helps push a passion forward. There's nothing wrong with doing free work and helping people out and doing something to build a portfolio or just as a passion project.
Right.
So, and in fact, that's what will ultimately help you stretch and build your skills. I'd never done a book cover before, which is part of the reason I wanted to work with Michael on this project. And it's because I was also a fan of the project and wanted to be a part of it. So yes, pay artists, but artists should also know that's just like anything else in life, you don't do everything for money. And
Right.
There's times where it's about the passion and the fun.
Right.
Whatever.
Right. And just to build off that and take it back to, this is getting a little businessy maybe for what we set out to say. But, I didn't write this the first time around to have it published. In fact, I was working on several other projects that I was planning to shop around to agents, and this would start my writing career. And I was so inspired by where I was living and the people I met on the North Shore, the setting. I just had to write. Like it just awoke something in me. And where I'd been sort of stumbling around on these other writing projects for a few years, I had the first draft of Mage out in a month or so. I took when I was able to lengthen the book, I took my full year that they gave me to work on it. But the original story just came so fast and furious. And it actually came out of, I moved to the North. Yeah, we're doing finger guns. You probably can't tell. I had moved to the North Shore, and I hated it at first. It was a prison sentence. It was something that I had to do because I was at a tough spot in my career and in my life, and I had to go move up north, move in with my cousin, and work at the restaurant that he worked at. I had never served before. I'd never been that far north. I'd been to Duluth a handful of times, if you're familiar with Minnesota geography. But I had never been up there, and it was a whole new world to me. And I'd only planned on doing it for a year. And so by the next summer 2010, I was ready to move back. And it felt sad. Like I had become a different person in that time, more so than any other time in my life. And I really needed to get it down on paper. And like I said, I like Wizards and I like the 80s, and that had to get in there somehow. Yeah. But I needed to talk about this experience that I was living in. So that's really how it came to. It wasn't because I was like, oh man, this is gonna sell some copies. This was me having to get out there what I was feeling as I was leaving this place that I thought I was going to hate and grew to love.
Well, and it's interesting, and just to kind of put a capper on our kind of pay artists for their art. I can't pay rent in exposure bucks type of aesthetic and mentality is that I think there's also I don't know, an expectation or entitlement that just because I create content, I deserve compensation for it. It doesn't, that's not necessarily a thing also. Right. So it's like, we we have voices that we want to put out there and have the feeling that maybe somebody would like to share in it. So I understand where you're coming from, Michael, of like, basically like, this is something that happened in my life. I feel like there's a story that I want to share from that singular transformative experience, and throw some trappings and tropes that are important to me also, while making it fun and engaging. Now, so we're going to talk about moving to Amazon and A War for the Mages in just a few. But Aaron, you I think of all of our gang, which includes me and Ryan and Caleb, who you also do Autopod Decepticast with. I think you were the first one that read the book, right?
I might have been the last, actually.
Oh, you might have been. You know what? Now that I say that, I think Ryan was actually first. But I remember that you had taken it with you on vacation and had read it over there. And so before we kind of transition into talking about the sequel, and yes, eventually we'll talk about your amazing cover art.
Right.
But I mean, we'll get there. It's a long form interview. What do you want? It's a free podcast. I have my exposure bucks already. I will eat this week. It's fine. Aaron, talk about a little bit about your impressions of the book and what kind of resonated with you, and from that, kind of what inspired you to want to work with Michael Andrew.
Yeah, well,
I bet you didn't expect to be put on the spot like that. It's like, hey, tell me about the book and why you like it.
No.
Tell me what happened in chapter 4 right now.
So I am a notoriously bad reader. And what I mean by that is not that I have bad reading skills. I can't read. But that's my problem. But it's not a normal part of my life. When I was a kid, I read all the time. As an adult, I watch YouTube videos and listen to podcasts for entertainment. I wish I was a better reader, because there's so much great things out there. And I feel like everybody is a smarter, better person if they read. For me to actually take the time to read the book should make Michael feel special that I was able to prioritize that. Vacation is when I read. I don't know what it is. If I'm on vacation, out of the country, whatever, that feels like the right time for me to actually be able to do it. Because honestly, I think part of the reason I don't read is because it puts me to sleep, not because the content is boring. There's just something about the physical act of reading that makes me drowsy, and I can't. So if I'm on a beach in Mexico, pull out a book, it's okay if I fall asleep a couple hours, wake up, read 30 more pages, fall asleep a couple hours. It's just kind of the reading process I've become accustomed to. So that said, I was excited to get the opportunity to read the book, and thank you for passing it off. I never took it as not that Autopod Decepticast has clout to hand out, but I never saw it as a clout chasing move, just for clarity on that piece of it.
Well, and if I can interrupt you really quick, it was kind of funny because after you guys read it, you all started trying to give me my exposure and reaching out and be like, where can we find it? And I was like, whoa, nowhere, man, it's out of print. You have a very rare copy there.
Well, autograph too.
I'm happy to have it. I forced him to autograph it, actually. Mine wasn't autographed. I had to chase him down and get one. That's
right. I forgot about that.
Great memory.
But no, the story, I just, from my standpoint, just opening it up, it immediately was gripping. It was immediately relatable. I feel like it would be relatable regardless of your generation, regardless of whether you are familiar with 80s pop culture or not. But the 80s pop culture was definitely a thing that helped bring me into the story personally. And I remember thinking, gosh, this is a really great book. I would have loved to have had the opportunity to illustrate this cover. I thought it immediately, like 3 chapters in. I was like, it'd be so fun to do that. And I even thought about just tossing it up as an exercise, or just doing it, personally. It's just like a creative exercise to create my own version of the cover. And I never talked to Michael about this, but even thought about, what if I were to make a poster or something like that, which is basically a book cover that he could, sell as merch or something like that. So all these little creative ideas, it was just inspirational on top of being a well-written, fun story with great twists and turns and great characters and great little moments. It was just inspirational for me visually. As a visual artist, I could see all these different scenes that would make a great poster, or cover rather. So I was grateful to eventually get that opportunity. And I don't know that I'm trying to remember. I can't remember that we ever talked about it per se, other than I think he had a different illustrator that was going to work on it. And I don't know if this is too political from Michael's standpoint, but just to try and tell the flow of the story, I don't remember when I expressed interest to you at first in working on it, but I felt like at some point I did make it known, or maybe I only sort of half-heartedly made it known, but then you had somebody else that was actually going to work on that project, and it fell through for whatever reason, and we made it a reality, and I was happy about that.
I remember exactly when it was. It was on my birthday Skype call, and it was after quite a few drinks into the evening, and or at least for me, because it was my birthday. Right. That you brought that up, and I was I love the idea. I was like, here's somebody that's actually read the work. Here's someone who I'm already vibing with, and here's someone I just love their work. I mean, this is totally, it's kismet, really. But the nature of when we brought it up, I was like, I don't know how serious he was, or if this was just like a thing you throw out at a cocktail party because you're never going to talk to this person again, right, sort of a thing. And I was afraid to reach back around to it. But I'm really glad it happened. Yeah, no hard feelings to the person that was going to work on it the first time, but
I've seen her work. She's a great illustrator. I love her work, incredible. But I'm glad I stole the gig.
Right. Yeah. Well, and to your point of sort of like, you picked up on visual cues and you wanted to do sort of a poster for it. The number one compliment, at least I hope it's a compliment, I get about this book is like, it would make such a great movie. And I take it as a compliment because I sort of write like that. I sort of think about that pacing of a movie. I don't really, a lot of authors kind of focus on like, I really need to take 3.5 pages to describe the room that we're in right now so that what the wallpaper looks like. And that just isn't me. Like, I just want the story. I'm in love with dialogue. I'm in love with the tension that comes from two people talking. Like, that's why I really write, because I don't think a lot of books do that. And I don't think a lot of young adult books do that. And I don't think a lot of fantasy books do that, where it's really a focus on the people and the characters. One of the things that, kind of going back to what we were talking about with the big ideas that can come out of like young adult fantasy books, there is a lot of, you can fill up with visuals. You don't have to, once you have like a great idea and a great world, and you just have to start, developing a system of magic or of fighting or whatever it is, and world building, that takes the focus off of the dialogue between people. You don't have these like, really great moments, or you lose some of that sometimes. But the things that come out of just having a conversation between 2 or 3 people. And I really wanted to introduce that back into my book and my writing style.
I just wanted to build on that in terms of, you're right. Like, if you're a fantasy author like J.K. Rowling, who's invented, or any fantasy author, J.R.R. Tolkien, you've invented this whole world where you have to explain what this new world is, how this new world works, and what are all these intricalities that nobody's really, it's just complex. I like the spells and the spell system.
Yes.
And exactly, it's a totally different culture. But in your world, the place you've created, despite it being 1980s United States, which may not be immediately relatable to a younger author, it's you don't have to really explain it, right? Like, it's a thing that exists and that we get. It's sort of in the zeitgeist. Even your sort of structure of how the hierarchy of magic works and things like that. It's just it's very simple. You don't have to like really like nerd out about it and get, do a lot of research to really understand it. It's very simple. Right. And the story is really told through conversations, through characters. Sorry, I'm doing your job for you, but as a reader, as a person who liked it, I mean, and maybe that's part of what made it so relatable. I could immediately jump in. I didn't have to do a lot of hard work to get my head around what this new world is. I could just get into what the characters are feeling and being motivated by, and all of that is really cool. But that said, the little supernatural, unique things about your story were really cool and drove a lot of neat things and twists and turns.
Thank you. Yeah, I like to experiment with some of that stuff. I come up with pretty crazy concepts and I'm like, I just need to own this. I just need to get this on paper. Someone's going to appreciate how weird and wacky and out there that is. Mm-hmm. But back to what you're saying is it's a first person narrated story. And there's a certain realism in that. If you were narrating a story, you wouldn't necessarily have to explain to the person what the rules of magic are. So that might be deceptively the sneakiest, toughest thing about writing the story is slipping that information in without it feeling, because at some point it's like, well, why do you need to turn to the camera and tell us how magic works? Aren't we all mages living in this version of the 80s? Like, shouldn't we all know this? So I try to poke fun at that and play with that a little bit. And the vibe I want to get in the story is sort of that Ferris Bueller vibe where like I can talk to you a little bit out of time. You do have the luxury of turning to the camera a little bit when you're the first person narrating. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I went with in writing my book. But there's not a lot of room for like, let me sit down and tell you how this magic system works. You're just going to have to trust me and I'll get you there. I'll get you to the end of the story. I'll tell you what you need to know when you need to know it. But I'm not going to have a prologue where I show you the map of the world and this is the countries and this is the resources of the land, sort of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that was something I really, really appreciated. And one of the words that we were kind of dancing around, or one of the descriptions we were dancing around, is it's approachable. I like that we're not just doing exposition dumps. I don't know why I have such a hard time with that word. I don't know why I can't say exposition, but
if only you were a podcaster, you might have a better grasp of the language.
And every time I do it, it comes across as exhibition. And it's like, that's something else entirely. But no, I mean, there's exposition and explaining things, but there aren't charts and graphs and extended chapters. Like, there is some Stephen King DNA here, some connective tissue. But one of the things I find off-putting about reading King is that we spend chapters upon chapters just explaining the world and just explaining what's going on. This is very much Aaron Sorkin town, where we're just walking and talking and just picking up everything as we go.
My hero. My other hero, Aaron.
Yeah, the other Aaron. So yeah, I mean, I guess we've reached the point in the conversation where, for me being on the outside, what's the cart before the horse situation? It's like, is it the sequel that you're like, hey man, I have an idea for a sequel. I'm going to write a sequel. I'm going to publish it. And then through that, I'm going to do a new version of Coming of Mage, or kind of walk us through some of the sequence of events, because really, like, as a friend of both of yours, some of this stuff just kind of happened through social media. Like, oh, by the way, here's Aaron's sick ass cover. Go buy the new copy of the book. Oh, by the way, here's an entire 300 plus page sequel with an equally boss cover on there.
Shaboom, literary heft.
Just kind of take us through some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I first wrote it, obviously I didn't think of it as a trilogy, but when I kind of rewrote it and reworked it for that publisher, I sort of envisioned it as a trilogy. And I thought, here's two other really fun settings and importance to the story that I wanted to do. But I just became disenchanted with it after everything kind of fell through. So I left it off on a cliffhanger, planning to do a trilogy, and I just didn't want to work with that publisher ever again. So sorry, I'm pulling back the curtain. This is going to get into the business side for just a second, but we'll get out of it. But I actually had to wait until their rights to the book expired. So for a long time, it just sat in limbo. There were copies floating out there. And finally, I got the opportunity to sign a contract or unsign a contract, however you want to think about it, and get the rights back to my book, which allowed me to start thinking about a sequel. But it didn't really happen until, I guess if you want to call this a silver lining of COVID-19, I just said, you know what, I need a project. I need something to work on in here, because if I don't write it now when I'm not leaving my house at all, when am I really going to work on this? And for a long time, I struggled. I had all these crazy tendrils of ideas for a sequel. And finally, it just clicked. Finally, the thing that I was missing from crafting a proper sequel just hit me, and it started, the whole sweater came when I pulled that string, right? I just wrote it, in about 9 months time. It was just out there, what I couldn't do over a decade. One of those things came out of, if I'm being honest, a mistake in the first novel. One of the threads I forgot to wrap up from book one basically allowed me to unlock what I wanted to do for the sequel. If I had wrapped up this one thing, you wouldn't have the sequel. You could have a book two that was just there for shits and gigs, but this allowed it to be a much more meaningful sequel to wrap up that loose thread.
Awesome.
And unfortunately, I can't tell you what that loose thread is, because it'd be a major spoiler of book
say one. That is, because it's like, I think I know what you're talking about. And we can't talk about that.
Yeah. And if I can just give a quick shout out too, I had a couple awesome readers, that never let Coming of Mage die. Like a good friend of mine, Carrie, would always reach out to me. When's that sequel coming? When's that sequel coming? And some days it was like an ache. It was a burden. And I just, I remember sometimes I'd just be like, never, or winky face, and then the reply, but I'm glad she kept pushing me. I'm glad she kept asking for it, because when I was writing the sequel, it really helped to know that someone cared about that cliffhanger. Someone wanted to know what happened to these characters, and it allowed me to put it out in the world, get it out there.
Well, and we've gotten this far in the conversation, and we got to give some love to your partner, Kate. Also, I mean, I have no doubt she's been instrumental in keeping you motivated and keeping the project online.
Yeah, and she absolutely, it's kind of funny though, she actually didn't read it until this new edition of Coming of Mage came out. She had read bits and pieces, but you know what? The character is so close to me, I really can't blame her, because I wouldn't want to live with myself and then read a book about myself in the same thing. It's cool when other readers read it, they can kind of escape into it, but when you're basically hearing the story while doing the dishes with me, it's not the same. But she also said she was a little nervous too, because it was so autobiographical. I think she was a little nervous what she might hear in it, and she was super supportive in that she moved up north to live with me. Really kind of a scary move. We were living up there basically on the Canadian border, and she came up and was my rock and got me through it. So yeah, but when she finally did get around to reading it just a few weeks ago, this new edition of Coming of Mage, she really liked it. And she said, I guess I don't know what I was so scared about in reading it. I'm really glad I did. And for a long time, I didn't know she was reading it. She kind of kept it. She bought it and kept it a secret, and she was reading it right next to me. And so now I'm going back and thinking like all the times that she laughed at these little moments or swore at these things that happen. It was about my book. And I think that was kind of cool. I like to analyze it a little bit.
That's neat. That's that's a lot of fun. I love it.
Yeah. And to be honest, there's more people that I can't even get around to thanking. Ton of people that helped me with the distribution of the book and telling people about the book and sharing it on social media, and people that did the covers that are even in this call. I mean, I had tons of help, more so than I could ever fit on an acknowledgement page of the book. And so if I didn't thank you personally, you should have been thanked, and just consider the book a thank you in itself.
Why? Thank you. I appreciate
Yes.
it. LOL.
These guys giving me more exposure than I deserve. Come on.
No, it's good stuff, and it's the reason for the season, and we appreciate everybody taking the time. So let's the Amazon deal. Could you talk about how the mechanics of publishing through Amazon works? Because I remember a couple years ago, or maybe it's more than a few years ago at this point, I remember hearing rumblings of Amazon engaging in publishing deals with independent authors. And I remember a person that I was a fan of, who was a podcaster and a comic book writer at the time, being really disproportionately salty about it, saying like, oh man, this means just anybody can just go out and just publish they own fan fiction. And I remember being really kind of off put by that take, and it to me sounded very gatekeepery, like, oh well, it's okay for, I'm entitled to have my voice heard because I've been anointed as a published author or a writer, and anybody that writes fic is below me. I mean, I'm way paraphrasing, but that's because that was a person that I was kind of influenced by. That kind of informed my perception of what publishing through Amazon was. It's like, oh, it's just people putting out their fanfic.
Right.
I guess first, could you dispel that myth, and then maybe kind of talk about your experience with publishing through Amazon? Yeah,
it's grown a lot. The first time I published Coming of Mage, a decade ago, it was a new world. The Kindle had like just come out. I still had to like fight to tell people what a Kindle was. I had to explain to them, and they had to. That's the first obstacle I had to get over. It was like, you don't need an actual piece of hardware. It's an app. Well, what's an app? Oh my God, let's start from scratch here. But now it's much simpler, and they have a lot, like I can get my book on print. It doesn't have to just be an ebook. They have their own printing press at Amazon. And the thing that's great about it is that there's no need to like print, say, 500 copies up front, which is where you run into a lot of that red flaggy stuff from shady publishers of like, well, listen, if you agree to buy X amount of copies yourself, we'll promise to print 1,000 of them. What they don't tell you a lot of times is when they print all those up front, and if someone returns them or they don't sell them, you're kind of on the hook to pay for them. You really need to watch out for that too. So this press that I worked at, I actually got like a negative royalty check at one time where I didn't need to pay them money, but they're like, you won't be getting a positive check from us until we sell these copies that someone returned. Stuff like that shouldn't even happen. But with Amazon's model of this like print on demand thing, I have my ebook out there. I have my paperback out there. I set the prices within reason. They do require you to set it to a certain amount, but they take a very small cut, and it's less wasteful. I mean, they're printing exactly what people are ordering. And in a lot of cases, they're fulfilling the 2-day requirement for like Amazon Prime, which is, I don't even know how that's possible, how they can like take the order, print the book, and have it out Monday morning sitting on the doorstep.
Yeah, because like I got my copies. I'm holding them up for the camera that nobody could see, but I got my copies as if I had just ordered like some John Grisham books. I mean, it was like no different. It's like, I clicked on them, I put them in my cart, I ordered them, and then within 2 days they were at my house. And there's a surrealness to it where it's like, dude, this is my friend's book, and it's, I mean, and we'll talk about this more with Aaron's art in a minute here, but it's like, it's a, pardon this for being reductive, but it's a real book. I mean, like it's got great cover stock. The pages feel good. It has that, it smells like a book. It's a book. So and there's just something really, I mean, I I want to be careful about, kind of Disneyfying Amazon, saying, oh, the magic of publishing through Amazon, the magic of Amazon. But it really is something special where as a independent hobbyist author, like your friends and fans and all that can buy this and get like a nice, handsome, very real print copy, and knowing that you as the artist aren't like buying like a disproportionate, inappropriate amount that you're just sitting on and hoping that your friends and family will buy.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, Jeff Bezos is kind of a spacefaring fuck, but but he does authors right, independent authors right. Standard in the industry is that a normal author would only get 10% of their book sales, right? So if you have a $12 book, you're only getting $1.20. If you have a $6 book, you're making like 60 cents off of every copy sold. Amazon gives you a 70% cut of your book sales. That's a huge amount going into the pocket of you versus them. So and then for the print cost, they take a lot more, but they're printing it. They're using the materials, and I don't have to put anything up front. I don't have to worry about printing it off myself or calling the publisher and being like, hey, I need you to print 100 more copies and stuff like that. It's just there. It's happening behind the scenes. I can go about my day knowing that people's orders are being fulfilled. And that kind of goes back to the first time my book was in print, is that I had to do all that myself. I had to buy 500 copies basically myself at a reduced rate, and I had to package them in bubble mailers and send them out to people. And it was a disaster. I didn't know that stuff. I didn't account for the price of shipping when I priced the book, and I ended up basically breaking even on everyone that pre-ordered a copy. And it was tough because people were being so supportive and like, we bought you book. And it's like, I am hurting paying for these bubble mailers and shipping, trying to get you this copy. But I'm really glad that you're engaging with the material.
Yeah.
But that's something has been great to take off my plate, just knowing that they're kind of fulfilling that stuff on their end.
So now that the books are out there, the Coming of Mage saga is complete for now. So talk a little bit about what the response has been. Kind of like what are you hearing from folks?
Yeah, well, like I said, that number one compliment is it reads like a movie, which beautiful. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's been really fun to see what people think about it. I know the first book, everyone really liked Celia, the character Celia, who was a pretty small part in the book. She was sort of my Poe Dameron, right? The great story is J.J. Abrams really didn't want Poe Dameron to survive the first act. He was sort of the guy that you just kill off right away. And he ended up liking it, and people ended up liking Poe Dameron, so he stuck around for the trilogy. And that's kind of how Celia was. I didn't really plan for her to be more in the story, and then I had a crucial spot for us, so she came back in later chapters, and then now she's a huge player, I guess, spoilers, in the sequel. She's got a lot of play in there, and she's a great character. She is so important to the world because Quinn, the main character of the story, he shouldn't be considered like the poster boy for mage being a mage, right? Like, he really doesn't keep up on his spell work. He's not a great mage. He doesn't know a lot of spells. He focuses on other things, pop culture. He's more into that sort of thing. He doesn't really care about that. And when he meets Celia provides this whole other world for him of, here's what you can do. Here's the potential that you don't have. Like, and she's not doing it in like a mentor way. She's just like, how do you not know how to tie your shoes without your hands? Like, this should be Mage 101. Yeah. So yeah, I think she's a great character. And I think seeing people warm up to her and respond to her has been like the surprise delight of these books, and just who on a more general scale, just who people gravitate towards. Like, all these great characters that are in this book, what makes you angry when they do, what makes you sad, what makes you happy, what makes you laugh. Like, that's just been the big thrill. Not very specific maybe to your question, but I think that's really great to hear.
That's awesome. I mean, that's one of the coolest things about making art is basically where there's a transaction at a certain point where it belongs to the audience. And it's like their impressions, their thoughts, their imaginations. Like, I mean, we're all in Transformers fandom. I mean, look at ship culture. I mean, that's something that's completely born out of people's imaginations and interpretations of the characters, and by taking something that was there and expanding on it and putting their own impression to it. So it's that perspective is always fascinating to me when you kind of imprint your own sensibilities onto a piece of art. It's very fascinating.
Sure. Yeah. And along with that, I think if anyone wants to engage with me, good or bad, about what they thought about the book, please bring it on, because I think I noticed this, the first book that I wrote, there's sort of like I don't know, like sort of like you don't want to engage with the author, right? Like you don't want to ask the tough questions and dig into some of the material, but I love that. I think it's great that you're buying my book. I think it's great that you're posting pictures, posing with it. But if it just sits on your shelf with dust on it, never read, that's dead in the water. I want you to read it. I want you to think about these topics. I want you to come back and tell me what you loved, what you hated. If you hated something about it, let me know. I would love to have a discussion with you about it. I hope you love it. I hope it's, I had fun writing every part of it. I hope it's as fun for you reading it. But let me know.
I love it. So while we're here, then where can folks get a hold of you if they wanted to engage with you?
Sure. Well, I'd love people to talk to me on Twitter, and it's just at my name, at Michael Andrews. I spell Michael weird if you hadn't noticed. It's Mikel. But yeah, that's kind of my handle for everything. So hit me up on Twitter and tell me why Coming of Mage sucked. At me.
As the kids might say, at me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you talked about the books sitting on the shelf, and speaking of them sitting on the shelf, if you put them side by side, that does look quite handsome. Those yes. spines align really quite well.
Aaron's the master. The master.
Aaron, it's your turn.
I think you got a lucky copy, a couple of copies. Glad you're in alignment.
Oh, I'll be darned.
Sorry, we don't have to focus on that. Sorry.
Aaron, I think you and I are both like a little self-deprecating of our work, and it's hard. It's hard, but you did an incredible job matching up those covers and aligning everything. And I guess before we start talking to Aaron about it, one thing that I wanted, some of my favorite book series have like these very similar covers that change a lot of like subtle little nuanced things, but at the heart of it, it's the same image. And I think that might've been tough a little bit for Aaron because I think he wanted to really like express, a lot more creativity. And I kind of like tried to rein him in a little bit. I was like, I want there to be some connective tissue between these covers. And he found a way to like do it in such a way that I didn't even know was possible. Like he still managed to impart major creative license on them that I love. So
major, you would say?
Major, yeah.
All right. So Aaron, it's your turn. Take us there. Tell me the stories. Tell me everything.
I want to know the hardships that you went through. Now is your time to blast me.
As I'm giving high fives to my Coming of Mage Saga books as they're sitting on the table here.
Well, to pick up on what Michael was saying, I mean, honestly, no. I mean, it was a pretty easy process. There wasn't any, at least in terms of, was he a diva or anything on trying to or did he try to micromanage the cover or anything like that? I wouldn't say really, honestly. And when it comes to the second book, and any creative interpretation, I appreciated the conversation and dialogue. I mean, maybe what would be most interesting or revealing would just be the process of what we went through in terms of, so I think I was pretty articulate in how we actually got the conversation started on how we do a cover, but and honestly, and he was going to do a republishing of the first book first. So that's the thing we had to tackle first, right? Is what's the concept, look, vibe. And I think it was always going to be the case that the sort of tone and look was going to translate. Like they had to marry together in some way. We'll figure out exactly how they're going to marry together, but they're going to look like they're part of a family. It really just starts with a brief, right? Like, we had a call. It was a fun, drunken call where I gushed over my fandom of the first book, and just try to hear from his perspective what some of the most important elements are. I had in my mind what I already thought were some kind of iconic potential imagery, but wanted to hear it from the author's POV as well, and try to just get into the deeper insights of the book and deeper themes. You're going to look at the cover and you're going to say, this looks very simple and like, clean shapes and texture. But that's from a lot of distillation. I mean, after having that conversation, I go back into a hole and I sketch out a handful of ideas. And then we got back together, reviewed some of those ideas, and settled on a direction that we felt was best. And yeah, there was some feedback after that direction was settled in terms of subtle things. But I mean, that's typical in a sort of client commercial artist relationship, and nothing atypical, I would say. He was, Mike, regardless of what you've said, you were not a demon client or anything like that.
Good.
So yeah, I mean, it was, from a process perspective, it's talking to your person, trying to get down to try to really distill the core of what the story is, what it means, and symbolize that. For me, the style I wanted to work with, as simple as possible. And Mike Seibert, you wanted to go down this rabbit hole with me whenever we were doing Autopod to Syndicast the other week, like the influences. I mean, it's the 80s. So there's a lot to draw from. 80s nerd stuff. There's plenty to draw from, right? I'm trying to also incorporate that fantasy element as well. And The Well was everything from, young adult novels that were out at the time, but probably more influenced even by video cassette tape covers and Atari video game cartridges and things like that. And honestly, Michael and I, we collaborated on that as well. I mean, for those out there who are doing this kind of thing, the tactic that we used was, I think we had a Google shared folder, and if there were things that struck our eye that we wanted to talk about, how it could be incorporated into the aesthetic, we would throw it in there. And then and we had a couple of meetings, and we would go through those visuals and just talk about why it was meaningful or why we thought it might have impact. Although it was part of the influence, part of the inspiration, I certainly didn't recreate a Stranger Things poster, but there, if you were to really look into it, there are elements of that there, whether it's a hint of a color nod, or really even just the idea of calling back to the 80s.
Well,
so yeah,
if I can interject quick, I think one of the most fun things for me and surprising things about the collaboration process was that it wasn't just us talking about it. It was, hey, give me a collection of images and things that are meaningful to you, and favorite book covers and album covers, and just I want to get in your headspace when I think of it. And it was also a great learning thing too, because Aaron had to, he forced me to sort of strip down Coming of Mage to what it was. He said, what are the themes? What are the tones? What do you want to get across in an elevator pitch? And how do we represent that visually? So it really forced me to think about what are the main beats of the story? What are the main themes and lessons of the story? And I did not anticipate that coming out of the cover creation process. I really thought it was, we would talk once and then the book would be in print next time I saw him. But it was a lot more back and forth, and it was very cool.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not an uncommon process in the advertising or design industry. What we probably would the equivalent of what some would call a mood board, that basically it's just kind of let's create a collection of things that are meaningful to this project aesthetically. And ultimately, I mean, you can't weave it all into the finished product, but you can at least get a sense of where someone's head is, what kind of style is making sense, and just really dial in on what matters and ultimately focus on what matters. And so we made the first cover, and I felt really good about it. Selected a concept, moved forward. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for the second book because I hadn't read it. To be honest, I still haven't
wrote it.
I haven't had a beach vacation yet, so I still haven't read it. So when it comes to, but from reading the first book, I knew enough. I feel like I knew enough about the universe that I felt confident in being able to do something for it. But obviously, we had another brief. Like it was like another briefing session where we talked about what it was going to be, what are the key. What's the tonal shift from the first book? What are the things that are going to dominate this new world? And honestly, Michael will say, I think this is probably where Michael will say he was feeling a bit too prescriptive in where the art went. But honestly, it was a saving grace. In our conversation, he was in this case able to really articulate some of the deviations from the first cover by basically saying, that the whole hand imagery really does carry over into the new world. But here's where things are a little bit different in terms of where the story is going. And we were able to kind of get to, what we need to take from inspiration to take that sort of core hand as the centerpiece with something in the palm to the new book. So honestly, it was honestly a blessing. I mean, I probably put in as much work as I did for the first book, but I didn't have, like, from an art standpoint, making the art, but I didn't have so much upfront fuzzy thinking time where I had to ponder what it was going to look like. So that was nice.
Yeah, I mean, you had done the majority of the heavy lifting already. You're not starting from zero.
Right. And I think one of the, you talked about there being sort of like clean lines and everything looks pretty clean and maybe deceptively simple, but across the two covers, even though they do look pretty similar, there is a lot of like Easter eggs hidden in each, and a lot of things. That's what kind of surprised me, is like we were able to hide a lot of meanings and themes in just a very, just again, deceptively simple images. And I think that's really exciting. And one of the challenges too, I threw Aaron a couple pretty big challenges. One, I really needed to keep the cover of the book from not giving too much away, because one of the biggest themes, twists, reveals happens within the first couple chapters, and I needed the book, the blurb, the cover, everything to not give away what that dividing moment is. And so we really had a challenge in the second book to there is lots of cool imagery and stuff that we could sample for the cover, but it needs to play into the mystery, because book 2 really is a mystery, where book 1 was kind of a mystery, but more of just ambling through the summer. Book 2 has a very mystery driven plot. The other challenge I threw at Aaron and he nailed was I really wanted the book cover to look textured, old, like an old beat up book that's been around since the 80s on someone's shelf. As much as I want people to take it off the shelf and read it, I want it to look like it's been sitting there for a very long time. So there's a lot of like textures and cracks, and people don't realize like how tough that is to make something look kind of beat up and used. It's that old Star Wars thing, like, right? Like making the Millennium Falcon, making all the ships look like this used, built, lived in universe. Mm-hmm. It's very tough to do when you're working with a brand new thing. And I was very specific. I said, I want smudges, I want grease stains, I want, coffee. If you can work in coffee, oil stains, all of it. I want it to look like that. And he came through on all of it.
There's a really cool depth of texture to it. It's like I'm holding, both copies in my hands, and it has, kind of like that intentional distress around the edges, and it's just really cool. It's like, so I really appreciate both of you guys kind of, I'm a huge process guy. So, I mean, I love this stuff. I'm not an artist myself. So anytime where we can kind of go under the hood a little bit and kind of talk about the stuff in greater depth, I really appreciate it. Plus, it kind of helps me articulate it better when I talk about it. Because every time I've brought up the covers, I was like, and my buddy Aaron did the covers, and it's like this kind of retro cool vibe. It looks kind of looks like an Atari game cartridge. I don't know. Go buy the book. It's rad. That kind of thing. So.
Well, yeah. And Aaron, I don't know if it's too proprietary, but I mean, can you get into how you created some of that texture? I mean, where do you even start on something like that?
Yeah, I can. And it's funny that Mike Seibert said Atari game cartridge, because literally, I mean, looking at pictures of Atari game cartridges on the internet, like even the old, like really generic games, like baseball, bowling, like
combat,
and yeah, I mean,
battle or whatever.
You see some of it in some of the design, like graphic lines of like the stripes in the ocean, Adidas, like they're like Adidas stripes. They're kind of a callback to that. So it's astute. And honestly, we had versions of the cover. Like first we got into the concept and approved the concept, but then there was the execution, and there were mock-ups of the cover that were definitely even way more blatant Atari video game covers. But
you actually did one that was an Atari game cartridge, and it looked so cool. But at the end of the day, your artwork was so beautiful, and the Atari cartridge itself sort of like shrinks that image down, right? And just puts it in a little sticker label. And I was like, I just can't do that. I need the full wraparound experience of this artwork.
I wasn't that precious about it, but I appreciate you saying that. but to your question then, Michael, the process, or like in terms of the tools, the process, whatever, everything starts and for me personally, in a hand sketch sort of phase, little thumbnails in a sketch pad that I have, and I don't do enough drawing by hand, honestly, but starts with a sketch pad, and you take of the 15, 20 ideas you might like, I take a couple and just push them a little bit further. At that point, I take the iPhone out, take a picture of it, put it on my Apple Drive. And then I go into a program called Procreate, which is an amazing, it's a professional art quality. I mean, people use it for published art. I do actually, elements of using Procreate do go in finished work. In this case, it didn't. It was just really about moving those sketches forward a little bit further, which is where we got to the presentation stage. So just a little bit more refined sketches, getting into colors a little bit at that stage. And then when it came time to the concept being approved and moving on, I cannot promote enough a suite of software. It's competitive to Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator are really the industry standard when it comes to art and design. But Affinity Photo and Affinity Design are the suite of software that I use. They have a great version. I use an iPad Pro 12 whatever inch with my Apple Pencil, and they have their mobile version has all the functionality of their desktop version, but it just makes it easy to be able to work. I did so much of the work on this cover when I was doing other things. We had some family emergencies and tragedies, nothing crazy, the typical family tragedies, but tragedies nonetheless.
The things that come up when you're trying to do a project. Right?
Right. But I was able to be on the road and work on it. And those programs work, I think, arguably better on the mobile than they do on the desktop. But they're fully functional illustration and vector design programs that if they ever want me to come and be a shill for them, I'm happy to, because I love their software. It was done in a combination of both of those, mostly Affinity Designer, which for those, this will be maybe a little too inside baseball for some people, but Affinity Designer is basically, think of it like Adobe Illustrator. There's vector art that you can do, which vector clean mathematical lines, but you also have the ability to seamlessly work in what it would be bitmap art, which is more photographic or like being able to put in more photographic textures and things like that. You're able to seamlessly work in those two worlds and bring a lot of texture and depth to your work that would take in the Adobe world flipping between two programs to accomplish, and you can do it in one. So anyway, that's my pitch on that as far as as far as the literal process goes.
Drop that link below to affinity.com and collect our checks.
Use promo code MSRP10 to save 10%. No, please don't do that, because that's not an actual thing.
Oh, that's the other thing. Hang on, just to pitch it one step further. They're also insanely cheap for what they are. I think you can get the iPad versions for something like $10 or $20, the desktop versions for like $40. You have to. Adobe is now it has been for quite some time, a subscription model. And so whether you want the newest update or not, you have to pay, $500 a year for everything. So all the updates, at least to date, with Affinity are free. You just get updates. So anyway, and it's really good software. It's nice. And the photo editing side, which is something I've been getting into more, is great with it also. I still use Adobe Lightroom for a lot of stuff, but I use Affinity Photo instead of Photoshop. Okay, now I'm done shilling. I'm done.
So to tie it all together, kids out there, you can write your own book, design your own cover, and then podcast about it. You don't need us three yahoos to do it. You can do it all in one from the comfort of your desktop.
Well, and that brings it all the way back around to independent artists and hobby artists, or hobbyists. And it's interesting how the barriers aren't there that were like when we were coming up, and it's like, oh man, like, I gotta get signed with a record label, or like I need to get signed to like a big publisher, this whole perspective of quote unquote getting signed. It's like, no, you could just put stuff out there and cultivate your own audience. And I think all of us are doing that in our own kind of ways. And honestly, on this podcast, the reason why I go so deep on that stuff is because I've learned things from listening to folks just talk about it conversationally on podcasts. So yeah, I mean, sure, maybe we're shills for the things that we like, but I get really bristly when folks kind of refer to content creators as like influencers and stuff, but like in our own weird kind of way, we do kind of influence through what our own preferences are. It's like, oh, I started listening on this podcast